We left off last time with turmoil going on in England. The problem was a lot of persons did not believe that Henry VIII had gone far enough in his breaking away from the Catholic Church, and they wanted to get rid of a lot of practices that the Catholic Church had that a lot of Protestants felt like were not necessary. So these people were called Puritans, basically because they wanted to purify the Church of England. And something that the book tries to emphasize, Puritans, they believed, the ones that came to America, believed that America had a special mission to be a light to all the world, a beacon, a city on a hill that shone and was a light to all the world. But the Puritans in England wanted to clean up the church. And they were suppressed. Queen Elizabeth I, who she didn't follow Henry VIII there were several years between Henry VIII and her. But Queen Elizabeth I, to her credit, did not persecute either Catholic or Protestant, but she tried to keep down extremes. Her record was not perfect. She did harass the Puritans, at least the extremes among them. But I want to say in her favor, at heart she was Catholic. But the Catholic Pope, or the Pope, said that she was illegitimate for the best of reasons. So in order to become queen, she had to become Protestant. So she became a Protestant. So officially she was Protestant, but at heart she was Catholic. But to her credit, she did not persecute either side. And under her rule, Catholic and Protestant began to learn that they could get along. When she passed off the scene, she was followed by her distant cousin, James I, from where we get the King James Bible that was very popular for some 400 years. Anyway, King James first resisted Puritanism. When King James first died, his throne was taken over by Charles I, and the Puritans became stronger and more insistent and stronger than ever. And finally, Charles I dissolved the Parliament and decided, I'm going to rule as I please. The Puritans rose up, chopped off Charles I's head, and a man took over, the Puritans took over. The Puritan who took over was Oliver Cromwell. Oliver Cromwell is not looked on kindly by history. Oliver Cromwell outlawed taverns, outlawed even puppet shows. The way that people would get around it was they'd have to hold a puppet show in somebody's home, but they'd post a guard at the door, and when the guard saw a constable, he'd whisper inside, "Constable!" And everybody would rush and hide their puppets underneath floorboards or underneath couches or whatever they could find to hide their puppets until the constable went on, then he'd get out and resume the puppet show again. But he outlawed card playing, dancing, and everything that he considered irreligious. After he had passed off the scene, the people decided, we don't want this Puritanism, is too extreme, so they called Charles I's son back, Charles II. Charles II realized, unlike his father, he had to govern through Parliament. But at least he granted religious freedom to the Puritans. But now the point I want to make is during this time of turmoil under Charles I, a lot of, and his father James, a lot of Puritans came to New England. And they decided, we're going to set up a city on a hill and we're going to be an example and a light to the world. Well, now, here was, if you're wondering, There are no Puritans today. What happened to them? Essentially, they became embarrassed to be called Puritan anymore, and they call themselves something else now. They're called Congregational. I know there's at least one Congregational church here in metropolitan Atlanta. But if you see hear the word Congregational, that's simply they're descended from the Puritans. No, I did not write that down. It won't be on the test. But here's what happened that made the Puritans thoroughly embarrassed. They embarrassed themselves. They had some dissenters among them. The three most prominent dissenters, all three of these people have one thing in common. They disagreed with the norm. And if you haven't guessed already, Puritanism did not tolerate disagreement. Did not tolerate dissent. Now, this did not become the norm in America. And folk, this could have been a really serious problem because the freedom to dissent is one of the things that made America so great, particularly in the field of science. You might have heard that a lot of the inventions we have were made by people who were told it can't be done, it can't be done. When the Bright brothers were about to fly their first airplane, a college professor of all people wrote that it's impossible to fly a heavier than air machine. He was wrong. Colonel Drake was told that you can't drill for oil. Oil can't be drilled for underground. He said, yes it is. There's oil underground. I can drill and find it. And he drilled a hole. It was called Drake's Folly, except it gushed up. Case after case. Inventions are made by people who say, I disagree, I dissent, I think it can be done. No matter what the mainstream says it can't, I think it can. But anyway, the Puritans did not allow dissent. Now, one of the dissenters here was Roger Williams. Make a long story short, Roger Williams disagreed with, among other things, on the colonial treatment of the Indians. He said the white man had no right to Indian land. And folk, again, I talked about that last week. You can tell me that you're blue in the face, he was right, but it would do no good. People were going to take it anyway. Nevertheless, whether he was right or wrong, he got kicked out of the colony. So he went on to found the Rhode Island colony.
Did Roger Williams say that in one Indian land, though?
Now, did he actually say that?
Like, did he say that either like in England or did he say?
He was a colonial. I don't know if he was born in England or not, but by the time he came along, a lot of the colonials were people who had been born in the colonies. Your book mentions Puritan women averaged 8 or 9 children per woman, and they quickly, when the Puritans came over, they had as many women as they did men, and in short order, women began to outnumber men. But he said it in the colonies. He told the colonials, the Puritans, what you're doing, the way you're treating the Indians is wrong. He should have been given the freedom to say that, folk. Instead, they kicked him out of the colony. So he went south and went to a little island called Rhode Island. And today, Rhode Island is the smallest state in the Union, but it is one of our states. He founded Rhode Island. Now, Anne Hutchinson, that story has fascinated many. Anne Hutchinson was born in England. Her father was a preacher, and her father taught her to read, partly because her father's first 6 children, his first 6 children were girls, including Anne. So he decided he'd teach his girls to read. And also, this was during the reign of Queen Elizabeth, when Queen Elizabeth knew 5 languages, maybe 6, and she knew how to read. So people were beginning to believe that, hey, females should be educated also. So he taught he homeschooled his daughters. He taught his daughters to read, including Anne. Anyway, one day, Anne Hutchinson, well, she was married, had a few children, and she met this preacher named John Cotton. And she really became fascinated with Cotton, and she and her husband would attend John Cotton's service every time the weather permitted, even though in those days winters were cold, storms were bad, and travel was not by automobile. So when the weather was too bad, they had to go to a closer church, but they would go for miles to hear John Cotton. Now, John Cotton disagreed with the Puritans on a certain doctrinal issue. And again, if you study the Puritans and things that they disagreed on, folk, it's things that they'd been better off to just let the other person believe as he will. All right.
It's like stuff that didn't matter, right?
In a lot of cases, even if it did, it's issues that we can't really resolve. There's some things we just don't know. All right, now if I may be, I'm going to take the liberty to do it anyway. I'm going to quote the Apostle Paul. I'm going to quote the Bible. Here's what Paul says. He said, one man believes this is okay, another man doesn't believe that's okay. Let each person be fully persuaded in his own mind. Let the person who doesn't believe not judge a person who does, and let the person who does believe not judge the person who doesn't. If Christianity would have abode by that, it would have solved a whole lot of problems. He actually said that, folks, and if you want me to, I can give you a chapter and verse next time. But he actually said that, knowing that, that there would be disagreements down through the ages. Let the other person believe as the other person will. But they couldn't do that. So they kicked John Cotton out of England, or John Cotton decided to leave England rather than go to jail. So he came to Massachusetts, and Ann Hutchinson and her husband decided, well, we're going to Massachusetts also. But they had to wait because Ann was pregnant. As for John Cotton, his wife was pregnant also, but she had her baby on board the ship. The Hutchinsons didn't want to do that, but they did send their oldest son on the same ship as John Cotton, so their oldest son could get in Massachusetts and get things ready for them to come. They came to Massachusetts a year later, and again, Ann Hutchinson set up a profitable business as a midwife, helping women to have babies. And her husband set up a profitable business because nobody of his profession was already in Massachusetts, so they did quite well. Then Ann Hutchinson started holding meetings in her house. Her house was right next to the governor's house. She started holding meetings. And at first her meetings were only among women, but they became so popular that she started inviting the men also. And particularly she would discuss the sermons of John Cotton. But the governor became alarmed. A new governor took over who sided with her. But then that governor was put out of office, and another governor came in who did not like her. Finally, she was called into court to be tried for the crime of heresy. Heresy is where you disagree with the religious majority or the religious norm, or disagree with your church. Now, in today's world, nobody can be tried for heresy, at least I hope not. Now, the churches can. Any church that wants to can say to a member, you don't believe as we do, and can kick you out. That's fine and dandy. That's the right the church has. Churches will sometimes try their members for heresy. But anyway, she was tried for disagreeing with the standard teaching. And again, I could go into more detail. But the main statement she made that got her kicked out of the colony was she said that God can reveal things directly to an individual, and God has shown me some things directly to me, and these things that God reveals is even more important than the Bible itself. Well, this doctrine was heresy to almost every Puritan. Each of you, of course, can decide what you think about it, but anyway, she was booted out of the colony, kicked out, excommunicated from the church, and condemned to eternity in hell for her heretical beliefs. That's what the church said. She went to Rhode Island, where Roger Williams already was, and she got kicked out of the Rhode Island colony also. Folk, she had a knack for setting her home right next to the governor's home, or right close to the governor. I want to tell you on a personal note, I like to keep myself as far away from my boss as I can. I seldom see my boss. I have a boss too, but I seldom see him. Try to keep as big a distance. I only talk to him when I absolutely have to. But she would try to ingratiate herself to the governor, and sooner or later she'd fall out. She wound up, while she was in Rhode Island, though her husband died, she had to leave Rhode Island, went to what is today New York City, and the Indians rose up and killed her and 5 of her 6 children that were left. She had 10 children, but 5 of the younger ones were killed. The 6th one was a red-haired girl, 9 years old, who hid herself behind a big rock, but the Indians found her anyway, and they adopted her into the tribe. Eventually, this child was ransomed by some of her relatives. Now, as for Anne Hutchinson, descendants, both President Bush and President Bush, the father and son, were descended from Anne Hutchinson. Barack Obama, on his mother's side, was descended from Anne Hutchinson. Thomas Hutchinson, we'll talk about there, was descended from Anne Hutchinson. Yes?
How old she was?
What's that?
When they kicked her out, how old? Do they know how old she was?
Oh yeah, we know her when she was born. She was in her 50s when she died. Yeah, we know when she was born. And the date of the Indian attack, though, is not well known because, and the date of her husband's death, because once she was kicked out of the churches recorded births and deaths. Once she was kicked out of the church, the date of her death was not known. And also the governor, who did not like her, said it was God's judgment. And but he made an entry into his records. Then the entry was made in September. That meant that, by the way the news traveled in those days, it probably happened in August. Her death happened in August of the year it happened. But anyway, she was massacred by Indians. And of course, the people of Long Island rose up and drove all the Indians off Long Island. Shows a lack of freedom of dissent, and all these things were to give the Puritans a bad name. In addition, Thomas Hooker spoke out against the way that the Puritans would only allow church members to vote. You had to be a member of the church to vote. You had to be a member of the church to hold office. Now, I want to say this. Officially, our country has not required church membership since the days that we got our independence from England. Church membership has never been a requirement to hold office, even though 99% of your politicians are church members. And it's only been recently that we've had persons who were not church members could actually win an election. Only in very recent times, but as recently as when I was still young. Only church members could hope to win elections. But nevertheless, Thomas Hooker was upset that they made it a requirement. So he went off. He was kicked out of the Massachusetts colony also, but he went right next to Rhode Island. If any of you know your map of the United States, just south of Massachusetts and just west of Rhode Island is Connecticut. And he founded the Connecticut colony. All right. These I want you to remember, 3 dissenters. In addition, there was another group of dissenters also, whom we'll talk more about in the next chapter. Your book introduces them here in this chapter. There was a group of extremists called the Quakers. We've had 2 Quaker presidents. I'm jumping around, I know, but their names were Herbert Hoover and Richard Nixon. We'll talk more about both of them later. But anyway, we've had 2. But anyway, the Quakers started off, they were very extreme. They did not have church buildings. They would meet in homes because they seemed to read in the Bible, in the New Testament, that the Christians met in private homes. So they would meet in private homes, and they had no formality. There were no clergy, and anyone who wanted to, man or woman alike, could get up and speak. Basically, you just sat around on your couches and chairs in the private church, and if someone felt an urge to get up and sing, that person would get up and sing. When that person would sit down, and someone would get up and speak, no formality. But then they'd go out and preach on the street corners. They preach doctrine. The women were considered equal to the men, and the women would also preach out in the street corners. Well, the New England Puritans hung, this book says 4 Quakers, another book I've read says 5, but they hung some Quakers for preaching out in the street corners. This, of course, brought down all the colonials on them. Particularly the other colonies started writing the governor of Massachusetts, why did you do this? The governor didn't do it, by the way. This was done by local magistrates. Even the King of England got involved. The King of England wrote a letter to the governor asking, why was this done? The governor replied, Your Majesty, this will not happen again. This was done without my knowledge, but I promise you I've told my congregation. So instead they started imprisoning the Quakers. The Quakers were highly persecuted. Again, they had a lot of strange and unusual beliefs, including they would not swear oaths, they would not join the army, they would not fight in wars. They only wore dark-colored clothes. Again, each of you can make up your mind for yourself what you believe about this. The Quakers, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit, were very strongly instrumental in founding the colony of Pennsylvania. But anyway, the Quakers were highly persecuted. All this wound up giving the Puritans a really bad name. And their city on a hill, just simply, the lamp, you might say the lamp went out. Now, yes?
I don't know if they still believe what they believe in today, but I know if you go to Philadelphia or anywhere in Pennsylvania, they're heavily.
They're still there. They're still around. And if, all right, Quaker, if you go to the shop, to a supermarket, you'll still see Quaker oats put out by them. And Quaker State motor oil, Quaker State, the state of Pennsylvania,
Correct.
high quality motor oil. They, generally regarded as high quality. They're still around. But here's the, all right, I know this firsthand. A lot of times persons who are extremely enthusiastic religious, when they start prospering and getting a little bit of money in their wallets, their religious zeal fades. They got rich. And they got rich by hard work and, which they believed in, and after a while their religious zeal fades. I mean, I grew up in a religious, I won't call them a religious group, where that they did not believe in smoking or drinking, and but they were all, they're mostly poor. But because they didn't smoke or drink, a lot of them had better attendance records than they were not fellow smokers or drinkers, so they got promotions in the workplace. When they got promotions in the workplace, they started pulling in more money. They took their old cars to the junkyard and bought better cars. They started living in nicer houses and wearing nicer clothes, and their religious zeal faded also. I mean, also, I'll say this, and I've seen this personally, and you will if you live. When the parents, and this is some of the Puritan, when the parents are extremely fiery religious, their children are oftentimes indifferent. And when the parents are indifferent, their children can go the other extreme, become extremely, I mean, in my case, my grandparents on both my father's and mother's side were somewhat indifferent. My parents were extremely devout.
And you're a rebel.
It goes, these things go around in cycles, up and down, in waves. And the Puritans ran the same thing. Anyway, yeah, we'll talk about the Quakers again when we come to the next chapter. Very important part of our history. Anyway, time went on. The Puritans had children, and as I've already mentioned, their children did not have the religious zeal of their parents. And it became a real problem in the Puritans. What do we do? These kids are growing up and they're not fiery enthused about their religion, and many of them not bothered to join the church even. And also, the Puritans believed that in order to be saved, you had to have a definite salvation experience, basically an emotional experience, most of the time where you'd shed tears or whatever because you're sorry for your old sinful ways. The children who had grown up in a Puritan home did not follow this example. Again, folks, each of you can make up your own minds what you believe about any of this stuff. And hopefully you don't think I'm trying to push any of it on you. I mean, but I have to teach about this stuff, not because it's part of the lesson. And if you have your book, this is all in your book. But see, it became an issue of what do we do about this new generation who is not following our footsteps, and what they did. Well, eventually they lost their religious zeal, all of them. The old ones died off and the new ones didn't. And eventually, I mean, if they could see what Massachusetts is today, one of the most liberal states in the country, and perhaps one of the most godless, they would roll over in their graves if they could see Massachusetts today. But that's another issue. But their light on a hill did not turn out. Now, one thing they did that is still going on, they began to hold town meetings. The New England town meeting still goes on. A town meeting is where the people who are interested in politics can attend, and everyone who goes there can speak, every adult can speak up, and everybody can vote. and the issues that are bothering the town can be discussed. They began holding town meetings, and they still do this today. They pass laws that enforce Christian conduct and Christian behavior. I have to insert this, folk. Neither Jesus nor any of the disciples nor any of the apostles for generations went to those secular rulers and asked secular rulers to pass law favoring Christian morality. It wasn't done back then, at least not that we have a record of. But the Puritans did it. And eventually, when the Christianity more or less took over, they got secular rulers to pass laws favoring Christian morality. Again, these issues still go on today. They did not realize. I mean, they wanted people to read, and they started schools. That was the beginning of education in the colonies. The schools, of course, every school had a Bible, and prayers were recited in the schools regularly. But they did not realize, something Martin Luther didn't realize either, is that if people start thinking for themselves, they're going to come to different conclusions. Martin Luther did not realize this. He believed if everybody would think that they'd come to his conclusion, they were wrong. The Puritans were so convinced they were right, they believed if everybody would just study, they'll come to the same conclusions we do. No, they won't. And again, it created all kinds of dissent which they could not understand and could not tolerate.
And these are the Quakers that started the schools and stuff?
The Puritans. The Quakers were a group that was persecuted. They were not as interested in education as the Puritans were. The Puritans, they did a few things right. Number one, they held the town meetings, which it still goes on in New England to this day. And number two, they started schools, which was the beginning of education in America. All right, the thing that really did Puritanism in, though, the Salem witch trials. From time to time, you hear about witch hunt. If you're following the news at all, our present president often refers to witch hunt. Essentially, now back to Salem. In Salem, Massachusetts, all right, about 5 young girls and a black slave. Yeah, they had slavery in Massachusetts at the time, but they got together and they pretended to be under the spell of witches. Before it was over with, 20-some persons, men and women, were hung for the crime of witchcraft. These girls were pointing an accusing finger, and once you were accused, you were as good as dead. What made them do it, they later in life could not tell. They couldn't blame it. They all 5 wound up unmarried and living in poverty. I think I know part of it. I'm the father of 2 young daughters myself. These New England girls, Puritan girls, were not allowed to play with dolls because this was going to be a form of idolatry. They were not allowed to sit around and tell each other stories or listen as older adults told stories. They were not allowed to make puppets and put on puppet shows. They were not allowed to dress in brightly colored clothes. They had all this youthful energy, mental and physical, built up, and it had to have an outlet, and finally the dam just burst. And this slave would go and talk with the Indians, and it's believed that she had a lot to do with it. And the slave would come back and teach what she learned from the Indians to these young girls. And they finally decide, hey, let's pretend that we're under the spell of witches. And this did a lot to undermine Puritanism. The witch trial, the city of Salem became a ghost town. Everybody who was wise left, and after everybody left. One of the big scandals in early American history, and it did a lot to do the Puritans in. The King of England sent a team over to investigate. The kings were to send several teams to investigate, and found that things were not what they should be. All right, meanwhile, leaving New England for a while, the Dutch. The word Dutch means from Holland. The Dutch bought some areas in New York from the
Is
Indians.
this in chapter 4? or
This
5?
is still chapter 4. Believe me, I'll let you know when we're on chapter 5.
Okay.
If you read, if you have the book, you know, the book's on chapter 4, starts in New England, goes from there to Pennsylvania. It's the founding of some of these other colonies besides Virginia. So this is still chapter 4. The Dutch were from Holland, and a man named Peter Minuet bought some land from the Indians in what is today New York, but he called it New Amsterdam, named after Amsterdam, the capital